Hey, what's up, Insiders of Omaha? Thank you so much for watching and listening to us on here today. We have, today actually this is a selfish experience. This is one of my most fun, engaged conversations I've ever had that Christian and I got to do with. It's actually the principal of my daughter's school. We brought in somebody that we don't get a lot of access to, an educator, a leader, and also a lifelong learner, and is curious about more things than he probably even knows about. We have Kevin Johnson, the principal of Trinity Classical Academy, a hybrid model school where it's part in school and part homeschool, working with the parents. You are going to get an insight into what that kind of world looks like. Might seem daunting and disruptive and maybe something you don't know a lot about. To understand this might just be the exact thing that you and your family might be looking for. I know it was for ours, and it was a long journey to get there. So come along with me for an amazing ride and conversation that will leave you wanting more, asking more questions, and hopefully we'll see you in an information meeting someday about TCA, which I'm a big proponent of. But nonetheless, you will be left wanting your thirst quenched even more. This is Kevin Johnson, principal of TCA, Classical Academy. As always, this platform, this podcast is paid for and run by me and Christian solely in our endeavors to get out the movers and shakers of Omaha and who's leaving this place a better place than they found it. And so please like and subscribe on the button below, leave your comments below, as well as reach out to us if you might be interested in being a guest, or if you might know somebody that'd be an amazing conversation. We'd love to connect with them and meet with them. Without further ado, here is Kevin Johnson.
Sure.
Yeah, we work something.
So we worked something out. She came up and she worked here for a year just before she was going to grad school.
Oh, cool.
And in that time, she went to Cormdale. Mm-hmm. And then she, the last weekend they were here, or she was going to be here, her family, their family was in town. And we said, you know, why don't we just all go to church together? It's a day we all just spend together.
Yeah.
And Jess and I walked out. And I thought, man, I feel like God was maybe tugging on your heart a little bit. And we weren't looking for anything different. Said, well, maybe. So then the next week, we said, well, let's
check it out again.
Let's check it out again.
Yeah.
So we did that for several weeks. And then we kind of had this, okay, what do we do here?
Yeah.
So started to listen to a lot of the Wednesday conversations. I don't know if you've listened to that podcast, but that's a podcast that Bob does, and then Chris Hemmelman, who's the pastor of First City.
He came and spoke at TCA that one.
Yes,
he's awesome.
Yes,
yeah, that was awesome.
So, and really,
City Light pastor?
Yeah, City Light.
No, First City.
First City. Got it. Okay.
And so, anyway, long story short, we felt like that maybe the Lord was calling us to a change, which was odd because we weren't looking for a change. We weren't looking to leave anything.
Yeah.
Started talking a lot with Bob, and and Bob's goal was never to pull from other churches, right? And so we started talking with him, and even just kind of talked through that, and talked with our pastors at the church we were at, and ended up there. But what we felt like was, it's a really probably a really elementary way to say it, but we felt like Cormdale was almost like TCA for adults. It was kind of like we were starting to get steeped in the history of church. We were starting to get, there was just a level of depth that we hadn't experienced before.
Almost like a graduation piece. Like, I'm ready for something deeper.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the two things kind of coincided.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep.
So just because I don't know about it really, can you explain TCA to me what it is?
Sure. So TCA, the easiest way to explain it is collaborative school. And what we mean by that is both parents and teachers take responsibility for the education of their kids. And we think that that's important because what we would say is that Scripture says, hey, parents are the primary educators and they're the primary people responsible for the discipleship of their kids. We'll see that in Deuteronomy 6. So this model is really a mixture of homeschool and what would be a traditional school. Students are on campus 2 days a week, and then when they're at home, the other 2 days a week, they are completing lessons under the guidance or instruction, depending on their age. If it's younger students like Nora, it's a lot of instruction. As students get older, it's guidance. And then as students get into high school, they're really managing the work independently. But they're doing that work at home. Now, the benefit, though, for a family is that the curriculum is chosen, the lesson plans are created, they're sent home weekly by our teachers. And so you get the advantage and the benefits of being able to do homeschooling with your students, not having to go through all the curriculum selection and planning, but then you also get some of the benefits of a traditional school setting, the socialization of that, but all under an unapologetically Christian umbrella, saying, hey, these are the Christian convictions that we live by. These are how we're going to teach your kids. You got to agree that this is how we're going to teach our kids. So 2 weeks in, you're not coming in saying, hey, I don't know if I like that you're teaching this. Like, hey, up front,
We told you already.
this is what we told you that we're going to do. And then it's classical. And so using classical content, classical
What is
pedagogy.
classical?
So classical is really what education used to be, just in general.
Okay.
But over the last 150 years, education changed with the development or with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, progressivism, things like that. And not just progressivism, I don't say that as like a political term, but just progressive education. This idea of creating a skilled worker who is valued to the economy, versus what it had always been before, and this idea, excuse me, of the development of the whole human, right? So this idea, there's a transcendent moral order. There is good, there is true, there is beautiful. Those things are accessible for us. They're above us and beyond us, but they're accessible for us. They help us know what it means to truly be a human, to live according to God's plan, to know him, to love his creation and know it better. But then also this idea that education was about creating a person, not just data. And so
It's almost like the old, like, this is just stupid to say maybe, but like what I picture like Little House on the Prairie schooling being like.
a little bit,
You know what I mean? Like it was more like
Wandering Schoolhouse.
Yeah,
which my
you-
mom taught in.
Oh,
Yeah.
very cool.
Really?
Yeah.
So like you're learning stuff that's more applicable to life as a whole.
You are. And it's not even just, it's not all that we're learning different things.
Right. It's how you're learning it.
It's how we're learning
makes
it.
sense.
And so
Yeah.
the goal is not necessarily to get to the end of fourth grade and say, I know all of these things.
Yeah.
That's certainly
And
true.
cap all of every state,
But it's kind of to say, I know how to learn.
Got it.
I
Yeah, that's awesome.
know how to pursue lifelong learning. And then that also means that we're going to do different things. So like we are going to read, our kind of one of the taglines, we're going to read the best of what's been thought, said, and written over history. And so, last year, I use this example a lot. Last year, our 9th and 10th graders read Paradise Lost. That's a heavy lift. A lot of people don't read Paradise Lost till college if they read it at all.
Never heard of it.
And so it's by Dante.
You haven't heard of it?
Yeah.
Me either. Yeah, I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, so Paradise Lost is by Dante, and it really is. It's this long epic, really about the fall of man, like original sin, and
Oh, wow.
but it is hard. I mean, it's written in medieval times, early modern times, I should say, and so.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, they dive into this. They're not going to understand all of it, but what they're going to pull away from it. So we're reading hard things. They're reading Tale of Two Cities. They're reading Great Expectations. They're reading.
Dude, I love that. I think that's awesome.
So it's great. And then a big piece of it is as they develop, are they learning to express themselves, to be able to write well, speak well, be influential.
Engage well, respect leadership as well as your own.
That's right. That's
your
right.
responsibility to be leader and led.
That's right. That's right. So we really kind of, So anyway, it's a whole lot of classical education. The resurgence of classical education has really been since the early '80s, and you can get really into the weeds about it, and which we do. Like we're trying to make sure we're doing what is true to as the classical education movement is rediscovering itself and developing. We're trying to be true to that. But at the core of it, it really is about, hey, it's the development of the entire person, wisdom and virtue, according to how God's designed them to live. So,
And Nora goes there. How's she liked it so far?
No, it's awesome.
Sweet.
Oh, and my wife is the one that's involved and charged with the education piece at home. I help out where little places like history and stuff like that. but I come majority of the time to assembly.
Yep.
I probably would say I'm probably there more than any other parent.
I think so.
Yeah. I get a lot of it, but
Yeah.
you're seeing in action a uniformity of purpose starting your day. The assembly allows for a piece of education, camaraderie, direction, understanding the vision, and that consistency daily is what especially a younger mind needs, in my opinion. And it's provided through a simple assembly, not just like a slap the table huddle of like, what are our tasks today? It's like, hey, let's keep the vision and the purpose at front in order to allow us to accomplish the tasks necessary.
Right.
So I think that's really cool.
pretty cool.
I mean, I have been I think I've been probably most impressed with what is the level of maturity that these young, and I'm only seeing really grades one or kindergarten through fourth and fifth grade, but the level of maturity that gets injected into these kids at such a young age, and in terms of how they respond to things, engage in things, and then produce things. So like the way they address adults. Every day they address the audience. They shake hands with somebody that's there to help and support the day. Mr. Thank you for your help today. To the way they conduct lunch at the lunch table. Every person at that lunch table is from a different grade. And it's a science scene that it rotates throughout the semester. So my daughter goes into a school not intimidated by somebody that's older through coercion or maybe potentially bullying, but in terms of they are influenced by being, these older kids are armored with the responsibility to lead and marshal young kids. Right. And that is a far better way to run a team and go through life and also build confidence and assurity in oneself. So you're seeing this. It's literally the drip method. It doesn't happen in a retreat. It happens consistently over time. And then the other part is when they do a prayer probably once a month over a foreign country that is being getting prejudiced towards their religious beliefs, being Christian, religious persecution, essentially. And what they'll have a sophomore, junior come up and give a no-note speech presentation to the younger kids about what this country is going through and where this is at. And I'm not kidding. They are speaking at a higher level with more confidence than the majority of college and beyond kids that and people that
Dude, I want to go start going to school.
It's cool. It's great. I mean, it's really impressive. I mean, and that's why
awesome.
they've had some massive growth in the last 5 years.
That's so
the hockey
cool.
stick has started to come up.
Yep. Absolutely.
There's been spin-offs. People kind of started some similar.
So we
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
about 9 years ago, school started. I guess next year would be the 9th year. School started with 67 kids, and we'll probably be right around 460 next year between the two cohorts. So, but I think some of what Tyson's talking about is even just another part of classical education is that we're partnering with just the natural development of children and of how they learn.
Yeah.
And so at that younger age, which we would call the grammar stage, they're just inputting a lot of good facts and data and what is good and what is true
Clean.
and what is beautiful and good words, and they're learning to recite things. They may not even know the depth of what they're reciting. So, if they are reciting Walt Whitman's "Oh Captain, My Captain," they might know the words "So Captain, My Captain." But then when they get into this logic stage where they're starting to make connections, build arguments, things like that, then they're going to dive in a little bit deeper and say, "Oh, Captain, My Captain's about Abraham Lincoln and about when he was assassinated at the end of the Civil War." Well, then maybe when they get into the rhetoric stage, when they're having to take that information and now synthesize it and be able to speak well about it and maybe even make judgments and about, how did this impact Reconstruction? Like
Debating.
This was huge, right? And what does that mean? What does this tell us about the human experience? What can we learn from history here? Where do we see history repeating itself? Where can we push back against that? And how can we do this civilly and have a discourse whether I agree or disagree with someone in the public square,
Yeah.
and do that well. And that's that rhetoric skill of being able to be up and speak. And so this idea of this grammar and logic and rhetoric, they're developmental stages, but they're also skills in and of themselves. The building blocks of something, the connections of something, and then the ability to take that thing and speak eloquently and persuasively and influentially, or write about that thing. So
Dang.
So one thing I think is our classical, no pun intended here, as this model is literally and figuratively. I think from an outsider's perspective, I'd love your input on this. It's disruptive to the current state of the education system. A couple questions, I guess. Why do you think it's caught on so well? Where do you think it's going? And then also, why are some people so resistant of it? Like this idea, not only is it like, oh, you homeschool, but it's like, oh, you homeschool, and it's kind of foreign. But then it's like classical. Like, I don't even especially my generation. I'm a generation Y, I think Y or X, whatever. But like, you don't even know. But that was really how it's done. So yeah, you want to expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. So I think I'll start with the pushback. Yeah. I think it's just we don't know what it is.
Okay.
Right.
Just as a culture,
Unknown.
It's unknown. So when you look, all of us who are raising kids right now, who are in this generation of raising kids right now, really back to our grandparents. Some of our older grandparents are probably some of the last people to be educated what we would consider classically. So I think it's a little bit of the unknown. So I didn't know that I wasn't being classically educated when I was going through school. I wasn't thinking, oh, my education is lacking or anything of the sort. But even kind of along with that idea, I mentioned earlier the Industrial Revolution, kind of this factory model. When you think about school now, in most places, you think I go to all the different subjects, they're siloed, there's not integration between those things, and it's what's the most efficient thing, how do we get the most for what we're doing, and then how do we produce the best for what we've put in. Very economically driven, productivity driven, and even test driven, right? So
and mass driven.
Right. So it's like, does it fit for everybody? And so it's a different model. So I think some of the pushback is it's unknown. Some of the pushback is, what needed to be fixed.
Ignorance, naivety.
Right. I think some of the other pushback, though, is this idea of enculturation. So classical education would say that it is about enculturation. It's about passing down tradition. It's about passing down the best of what's been thought and said throughout time. But I think when we look at progressive education, and again, progressive not in a political term, but just progressive in the current educational model, when we look at progressive education, really in some ways it's about let's move away from what happened in the past, and everything that's happening now is better. Everything that happened in the past is not good.
Let's leave it.
And let's leave it and let's grow and let's be better. C.S. Lewis kind of uses this idea, he calls it chronological snobbery. And so that maybe is in its best form, thinking that what's happening right now is the best that could ever be happening. But in its worst form, it's kind of saying, hey, you know what? We're better than we ever were. And what happened in history doesn't impact us. And because there was sin and because there was brokenness, we're actually going to turn away from that. Now, the progressive culture isn't necessarily saying because of sin and brokenness, but they're saying, hey, there were some really ugly things during the Civil War. Or there were really ugly things during the Revolutionary War. There were really ugly things during you name it. But what we're going to say is, instead of saying those things didn't exist, instead of trying to rewrite history, we're going to address those things. We're going to talk about how did sin and brokenness impact what was happening in the world? What can we learn from that? What was being written about that? How do we not repeat that? And so I think it's because we're willing to step back into history and value those things, I think there's also a pushback there a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think then there's just the pushback of it's pushing against what is popular culture right now, right?
And what's being supported,
right?
Largely.
There was an article. I'm trying to remember if it was. I can't remember where I actually read it, but it was mentioning just the enrollment declines that we're seeing in education around the country,
Public education.
And that's right. And so schools are seeing enrollment declines. And there's a lot of reason for that. I mean, birth rate is going down, things like that. There was this mass expansion of schools and building and things like that. So there's partly there, but we've also seen an incredible increase in the number of people who are doing homeschool, private schools, or other options. And a lot of that was kicked off during COVID, because during COVID, I think people realized when all of a sudden they were invited into the classroom through these remote learning opportunities, wait a minute, this is what my kids are learning? This is what they're talking about, or this is all they're doing. And so I think we have lived in a culture where we haven't really understood that our kids are capable of a lot more if they're taught how to, and if they're guided to do that work well. But I think parents also kind of woke up to the fact that education is not as neutral as I thought it was. I thought I could send my kid anywhere and that they wouldn't be impacted by some of the cultural arguments that are being made. And that's just not true, because those are assumptions that were underlying those things. Now, I'm really careful to say that that's not every educator. I dedicated 20 years of my career to public education, felt like the Lord had called me to urban education, and that's where I served. That's where I thought I would serve my entire career. But I went in knowing that the system was not built on truth.
Right.
The system was not built on, Christian traditions, Christian values, Christian virtue. So I went in kind of with an mindset to saying, hey, this is where I'm going to serve. And there's a lot of educators who do that, and there's a lot of good things. And there you'll still see vestiges even of classical education in education today. I mean, we all have probably read Shakespeare. We've all probably read Milton. We've all probably read. So we're still, even in
Still in there a little bit.
That's right. Even in a classroom, you're still going to see vestiges of these saying, "Hey, these are the best thinkers of Western civilization. Why are we doing this?" So, but I think one of the reasons it's growing so much is people are expecting more. They're also understanding what was actually happening in the classroom. And I think in this strange providential way, COVID exposed some of that. So.
Yeah, I have to imagine, obviously, you could probably shine on this. Luckily, our daughter really wasn't in school yet, but watching what was transpiring in front of us and having to somersault, and then just the amount of impediment and control and almost coercion that the school system was enforcing on the public. It was because you just knew no other way, and you're just like, yeah, we're gonna get in line, and we got to do it this way.
Yeah.
I gotta imagine that it's really hard as an educator, especially as a principal trying to lead a school, of how to manage or how to even navigate that or lead that. How was that with all the opinions coming through from your leadership team and through your teachers? How was that like?
You mean just how we lead in the current moment?
Well, through that time and space, specifically during COVID and coming out of it.
Sure. So I wasn't at TCA.
Okay.
I was at TCA as a parent during that time. So we've been at TCA for 8 years. We came the second year it existed. I was still in the public schools during COVID.
Right. Okay. And you've been there 3 years now.
This is going in this is my third year. And so in some ways it was great for TCA because we were already set up and prepared just by our model that parents were already taking ownership for the education of their kids. And
it wasn't that big of a gap.
It wasn't a huge gap. Now there was still that moment, from March to May of 20 where our kids were home too, because everything shut down. But we just kept doing what was already being laid out. Teachers kept producing lesson plans, sending those home, and co-teachers kept executing and teaching those lesson plans at home. So there wasn't necessarily this big change, other than the kids didn't get to be on campus, and that was a bummer. They missed that part, but it didn't change the fact that we believe parents are the ones who are primarily responsible for that education. And so I think a school like TCA was really well positioned to weather that storm. And I think I want to go back real quick. There was one other part that you had asked about why I think TCA or schools like that are growing. And I think one of the other reasons that something like TCA is growing for us specifically is people are interested in classical, people are interested in an unapologetically Christian school. But the collaborative school, I think, also gives a lot of freedom for families who might otherwise think about homeschooling because they see all the values of homeschooling, but they're intimidated by picking the curriculum, by planning the lessons, by doing all those pieces. And so to be able to partner with a community of like-minded people to do that has been huge. So we have 197 families at TCA who are in this community, all kind of doing this together. And it doesn't mean they all have the same family cultures, but it means that they're swimming in the same water. We want the same things for our kids. We want them to know and love Jesus. We want them to know what it means to grow in wisdom and virtue. We want them to know what it means to do hard things, to learn how to persevere, to learn how to speak, write well, all of those pieces. But I don't have to do it alone as if I was going to choose to homeschool exclusively.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, and I think we're seeing even a resurgence in the 100% homeschool.
Absolutely. We are.
Their ability to find each other and plug into the homeschool community is massive now. I mean,
it was totally different when I was growing up.
that you were on an island.
Yeah, when we were homeschooled growing up, because I was homeschooled my whole life, they had like co-ops is what they call them. They might still call them that.
Yeah.
They had co-ops, but to be honest with you, it was like we were the only people that didn't live in the farms. You know what I mean? They would go to that. We were like the only city kids in those groups. So there was a big like disconnect. But I actually read a stat recently because me and my mom were talking about this. And I have a lot of people that I've met that are homeschooled now. When we were growing up, it was less than 1% of the population that were homeschooled. Now it's close to 10%.
Oh, man. That's right.
So it's 10x'd since I was a kid. And I think I could feel that. You can kind of tell. But I think it's just the mindset of the
I think so too.
of the school system.
Well, and probably another difference from when you were doing is even for families who are exclusively homeschooling, the access to good quality curriculum has exploded. You know, you've got places like Classical Academic Press or Memoria Press, and not to mention even the non-classical homeschooling curriculums, but you've got places that are producing really, really good, high quality curriculum. And we use a lot of that curriculum even at TCA.
You know, it's funny. That just made me think of when I was a kid, one of the ways we got curriculum, I forgot what it's called. I think it was called Bob Jones.
Bob Jones University?
Yeah, have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way we got it was we had live classes. But the way you got to see the live classes is we had this giant satellite we had to mount on our roof. And then I remember me and my dad had to like bring the wire. I was probably like 10. We had to like bring the wire down, and it was really glitchy, and like you could kind of see the teacher. And it was just kind of funny. I'm like, now it's all online. It's like no duh. But we had this giant satellite we had to hook up. I just remember that for some reason.
Awesome.
It's pretty funny.
That's cool. Talking about, so as a principal, there's a certain type of student and family that comes to TCA. What kind of teacher are you? What kind of person is attracted, or what are you seeing as you hired, released? What are some of these really strong common denominators in each individual that makes a good fit for TCA?
So in some ways it's one and the same, because a lot of our teachers are also co-teachers. So they teach on Monday, Wednesday at the school, and then they co-teach their own students on their home days on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or vice versa. They teach on Tuesday, Thursday, and they co-teach on Monday, Wednesday. And so I think it really comes down to families who are truly dedicated to the discipleship of their kids and understand that that includes education, because really at the core, education's formation. And we had an informational meeting last night where we bring new families in. We kind of say, this is what TCA is. This is what you can expect from us. And more than anything else, what I want them to walk away from those meetings understanding is that their children are going to be formed by the educational environments that they're in. And so that formation matters. We kind of joke around, it's not even a joke, but we say it's a 15,000 hour decision, because 15,000 hours is roughly the number of hours that kids are going to spend in school. And so that's a lot of hours to be formed by somebody or somebody, some ideas, some assumptions. And so anyway, all that to say, the families and the teachers who we attract at TCA and who I think are attracted to teaching at TCA are people who understand that idea that this is about formation and it's not just about information. I may love teaching geometry, but at the end of teaching geometry, what I would say is true about a TCA teacher is that our goal is not just that I can list off a whole bunch of theorems and postulates and things like that, but that I can understand through math that God is a God of order and God is a God of consistency. And so I can trust him, or I may love history and I may be able to rattle off a whole bunch of history and I can make connections, but I would say that our history teachers aren't saying, we want kids just to know dates and times and places and things like that. Instead, we want kids to see history, see the arc of history, see how human existence, human reality, human understandings fit through that. And then more importantly, to see God's sovereignty through that, to understand God has been sovereign, God will continue to be sovereign. So all of those things fitting into the disciplines fitting into God versus my discipline is siloed. And so I'm going to teach my thing, I'm going to go home. And so the type of teacher is someone who says, I think it's formation, and I think it's about virtue, and I think that kids are formed through the good, the true, and the beautiful, and that's what I want to be a part of teaching.
Question, do you think in your experience of being around teaching so much in schools, kids learn more through information or emulation?
I think it's, well, I would add one more, I'd add experience, right? Okay. So I think it's both. So I think information is important. I talked with parents on Monday and Tuesday night, and education is formation, and that means that the knowledge that we interact with is formational. So the books we read are formational. The work we do in math is formational. The history we read is formational in and of itself. But if we stop there, then that's stopping too short. Instead, what we need to do is now teach what to do with that information. Teach our students what to love and why to help form their affections. And so, because if all I know is the information, to go back to, a captain, my captain, if all I know is the information of a captain, my captain, but I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how are my loves shaped? How are my loves formed? What does that teach me about the human experience, about God? Then I'm stopping short. So the knowledge is formational, but then the process itself is formational. So when I'm reading a hard book, when I'm doing a hard math lesson, when I want to quit, the process, the learning process, where I'm learning perseverance, where I'm learning diligence, where maybe I'm learning charity. I'm reading an author who I may or may not agree with, or I'm deciding that I agree with. But it takes a lot of courage to be an author, right? It takes a lot of courage to put your words down, knowing that they will live beyond your death and that they will be critiqued beyond your death. And so to understand and approach a piece of literature, a piece of writing with charity, that process is formational also. And I think we've spent a whole lot of time in culture and as parents mowing down obstacles for our kids, but we're not doing them any service for the future, because if they're not having to learn how to persevere, how to be flexible, how to be diligent, how to do hard things, and how to do that with joy and curiosity, then they're not going to be able to do that as adults either. And so the process of learning is formational, the information is formational, and then the emulation you were talking about, that comes back to your question, Tyson, about the type of people. We want people teaching at TCA who are pursuing true discipleship of Jesus Christ, who are loving the people around them, living by Christian virtue, Christian values. Yeah. And those Christian influences are also going to be a huge part of how our kids are formed.
100%. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. That's a amazing answer. So.
I was listening to a podcast about biblical masculinity the other day, and it was about kind of foundationally about we've been getting things. I'll call it, been getting things wrong on how to formulate your future aspirations, and it's talking about what's your fundamental why. And it's like, hey, if you're led by purpose, then whatever follows next is irrelevant because you're being led by purpose, versus I'm going to figure out what to do and then try to figure out my purpose through what I'm doing. Right. So it's an identity shift. And I thought that was like fascinating, because the idea was, if I know why I'm here, if you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, Christian's a Christian. If we're here because to pursue God in all we do and do all things through Him who strengthens us, then all of a sudden, now if I go and do, maybe I'm not a plumber, but I'm gonna go help be an apprentice, and or do some manual labor. I'm doing it with the thought of, hey, I'm gonna do it to the best of my ability, because that's what I've been empowered to do and instructed to do by the word of the Lord. Then you might find out through that, hey, maybe then try a number of things, and now you're finding out, hey, now I know my identity, I know who I am, I know what skills I have, but now how do I employ them properly? Then you find out what to do, and then you have the ability to influence. Because it doesn't come in the reverse.
That
Hey,
makes
what do I
sense.
do? Now I have influence. Why am I influencing? So it's completely turning it on its head. And the original, like the progressive education system, I feel like has endorsed, let's figure out what to do.
Right.
And then eventually you get there, you're unfulfilled. 10 years down the road, why am I still doing this?
It's true.
And now I got to figure out my purpose. And now we have a lack of like masculine leadership. We have a lack of leadership in general. We have a lack of stewardship in terms of faith and principle and moral and ethical decision making. Like, it's all true. So I love, that was a great answer. Finding purpose, and they're talking about our purpose is Shannon every day. You know, and in the assembly every morning, what do you always say? One of the main things, you say it every day.
Sure. So I start assembly every day, say good morning.
Yep.
The whole school says, I say good morning TCA. The whole school says good morning, Mr. Johnson, whoever's talking, and say, this is the day the Lord has made. And the school responds in chorus, let us rejoice and be glad in it. And so, it's just like, hey, this is the day that God's ordained.
Yeah.
And we've got a job to do today. We've got a purpose to fulfill. And so that's how we start every day.
It simplifies the order, and it simplifies the task. It's very clean. I think it's really cool.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, Tyson, because it's not that those things, it's not that figuring out your vocation, it's not that college career are bad things. They're good things, right? They're how we help to advance the kingdom of God here on earth, right? So, but where education today is stopping short is they're saying that's it. That's the goal. So I need to do well in school so I get the good grade. I need to get the good grade so that I can get the good scholarship. I need to get the good scholarship so I can go to the right college. I need to go to the right college so I can get the right job. I need to get the right job so I can have the right salary so I can do what?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the thing. And so it's like, what's the what? What's the purpose? And so even again, Monday night, we talked about this idea of wisdom and virtue, and that's the true purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. That's who we're trying to develop at TCA. But this idea of virtue, going back to what's a Greek idea of arete, and this arete was the ability of something or someone to fulfill their purpose. And for us as Christians, man's purpose is to know, love, enjoy God forever, right? And so it all comes back to what am I doing here? And my purpose isn't what my vocation will someday be. My purpose is what God has planned for me through whatever context he puts me in. And so then again, even the model of learning how to learn, so that if I make a change in my career halfway through, my identity's not changing, right? My identity is who I am in Christ, and what I've learned how to do, and that I've learned how to be a learner, and that then positions me even better to be able to make a switch someday if I want to, without this big identity crisis.
I think it's being in the military. A lot of guys get out, professional sports, whatever that might be, some sort of calling where you are basically thrust into this intense model. A lot of people will get out of that lost completely because their identity was in that. Professional athletes see all the time. Their money gets wasted away. Their influence is completely wiped from their feet once they are out of the limelight, and once they're considered relevant anymore. The military, I am lost with purpose. I do not know my mission for the day. I'm not putting on my uniform. I'm not saluting to what I believe in. The ideals of what the flag have been produced, and all of a sudden, you are shot out the end of a shotgun to figure it out. And I've seen this with guys that in combat or not in combat or sort of peacetime, you just lose the sense of order because they were using, I would make this assumption, a lot of times you'll go into the military to help prove something about yourself or prove to somebody else when you're actually still forming your identity versus going in with you know who you are and I'm going to serve and then I'm going to go to the next thing. Completely different. And so I think that's one of the hard things. You can't corporatize identity. Corporatize is a journey, and like finding that out is a process. That's what's transformative.
Yeah.
So that's I don't know. It's interesting in terms of these kids are already starting to formulate at a very young age, most impressionable age, identity and something bigger than themselves, respect for the right authority, that kind of thing. Yeah. I had a question in terms of, you've talked, I think I've heard about Christian stuff, the Christian value and the Christian foundation more than ever talking one-on-one here versus just a glimpse I get in assembly. How do you guys handle, or who is in charge of the Christian stewardship of the body of the school?
Sure. So I would say it's a shared responsibility between myself, the other leaders of the school. So right now we've got a grammar director who oversees kind of the younger students. So it's her responsibility. It's my responsibility. It's also stewarded by our board.
Okay.
So built into our statement of faith to say, this is what we're going to teach by. This is how we're going to approach, which is how we're going to approach this curriculum. But then it's something we talk about in our faculty meetings as well. Mm-hmm. It's something that it's that we keep in front of it. Every morning we gather as staff at 8:05 and we talk about, it is more of a huddle where we're, hey, this is what's happening for the day. This is what you need to be aware of. It's complex keeping two cohorts because it's almost like two schools.
Yeah.
But it's complex keeping it together. So part of that is this is what's happening. This is where we're headed. Mm-hmm. But a huge part of that, and one of the reasons that even as we have gotten bigger, I know Sarah before me kept it in place and I've kept it in place is because we spend time then in prayer for each of the families. Mm-hmm. And so we dedicate time every morning to say, hey, this is our purpose. Our purpose in teaching the phonograms today ultimately isn't just about teaching the phonograms, but it's about helping to partner with parents to point kids towards Christ. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just something that is always in front of us, that we don't just want to be a Christian school in name, but we want to make decisions. Mm-hmm. We want to function. We want to, in our conversations, in our curriculum, to always come back to those core convictions and live and work by those.
I've got to think, I'm constantly comparing and contrasting with my view of the tradition. I shouldn't say traditional. I should say the current system.
Sure.
And then the classical TCA school. How is discipline handled? Like discipline and accountability.
Well, that's another piece where I would say that falls more into our Christian convictions, right?
Right.
So even when we talk to new families or when we talk to current families, we have a very distinct Christian view of what it means to be a person, right? So we're all created in the image of God. So we're worthy of great dignity and honor because we are image bearers. Mm-hmm. But we're also born sinners. Mm-hmm. And so we're born sinners in need of redemption. And so we're not surprised when we have discipline issues at TCA. We would expect them because we're dealing with sinners. Yeah. And we're sinful people dealing with sinners, right? Yeah. And imperfect people. And so when we approach discipline, we really approach it from looking at conflict from a biblical worldview, right? Like, hey, going to that person. I'm going to help you as an adult to go to that person, or I'm going to help you take responsibility for this, or I'm going to help you have a conversation with that person to say, this is how I feel you wronged me, and can we work towards restoration through that? So a lot of our discipline conversations actually end up being more coaching conversations, conversations towards developing character, and conversations towards working towards restoration, repentance and restoration, than just assigning a consequence.
So a completely different mindset of discipline is not something that happens to you.
Discipline is something that happens for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will also say there are times you just need to say,
hey,
I'm teaching, stop talking.
Yeah, right? Yeah, this is not a kumbaya moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And that happens too. And so, it's not looking through rose-colored glasses here, but it's the idea that we're just approaching it from a different perspective, which then changes how it plays out.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
I think there also, I would have to imagine that sometimes you're found saying, Joseph, or whoever this young kid is in the front of you, how do you think God would handle this? Like, you probably have to have this conversation. The bad guy is not you. Like, hey, let's put it up here. Like, I have failed. I've screwed up too. Like, don't think this is above me. But let's talk about how this would be handled if we could do it again.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's discipline. It's training to do something. It's not punishment.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
It's
Real
training.
discipline, not like smack you
Yeah.
discipline.
And there's correction at times too. Sometimes there's a stick method.
Yeah, absolutely. The other real key piece, though, and I mentioned this before, we're doing this in a community of like-minded people.
Yes.
And so you're partnering with a parent around discipline, and you're maybe identifying a heart issue for a student, and you're having a conversation where I would say the vast majority of those conversations, I pick up the phone and I say, hey, this is what happened today, and this is how we worked through it, and this is how, this is how we led them towards an apology, or led them towards accepting an apology if it's on the other side. Can you also talk to your child about this? Because the other piece of this is, just like we would say that parents are the primary educators and the primary disciplers of their children, they're also the primary disciplinarians of their children.
Right.
So
should
if there is a major heart issue going on, we're not going to say this is our responsibility as a school to fix this.
Yeah.
We're going to say, hey, we're going to partner with you well, but how do we approach this?
There's a double accountability there.
Absolutely.
Like we're gonna if it's happening at school, we'll start the conversation. You will end it.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we see parents working together too. Yeah. So that I never saw that when I was I went through several different jobs where I was before, and one of them I was a dean of students, which was a really fancy way of saying I did discipline all day long. And I loved it because it was fun. Those are actually some of the kids that I have the fondest memories of, because of the kids you got to know well. But I always had to stop short. I always had to be like, listen, you just got to knock it off. I don't want to suspend you, but this is what the code of conduct says. This is what we're going to do. And then you get on the phone with the parent, and depending on the parent, they might say, there's no way my kid did that. I'm like, well, actually there is. Or,
they did.
I'm sure it was someone else's fault. And we just don't experience that same level at TCA. We see the partnership to say,
more of a,
I care about my kids' growth. I care about other kids' growth.
That's gotta adjust your conscience, your heart. I mean, like, to not wear, like, well, what I did today is not going to help. But, that stopped with me. And, like, there's no, there's no follow up on the other side of that. That'd be hard to take home every day.
Yeah.
And because that can wear on you. I mean, it's you that energy it would be tough.
It would be.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard, but it was also
rewarding too.
It was rewarding, and there were certainly families who were on board, and they wanted the best for their kids, and they would work towards the best for their kids. But the rewarding part also was, sometimes you got to see that growth in a kid in that setting. You just knew that growth wasn't being supported anywhere else, and that was the sad part.
Oh, that is tough.
Yep.
I'm curious. I believe education, being a devoted educator, is a calling. Like, and if you decide to answer it, it can be a really beautiful one. I'm kind of curious of, what were some of the experiences and some of the processes that you went through that were transformative in the sense that led you to say, this is what I want to do. This is what I dedicate my life to.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that, hey, I thought I was in a job that I was going to retire in.
Right.
It means, hey, I'm pretty committed to this. And then I'm going to pivot to a different role, following somebody who started something from nothing.
Right.
And try to build this out even more.
Right.
Like, what were some of the things that happened in your, before?
Sure. So the really easy one, I've told this story many times. I was not going to be an educator. There was no way I was going to be an educator. I went through in high school. There was a teacher who read some of my writing and said, hey, I'd love you to work on journalism. I want you to take my journalism class, do the yearbook, do the newspaper. I'm like, no way. I don't want to do that. She kept coming back to me. This is probably my sophomore year, kept coming back to me. And finally she said, I'll let you be the sports editor. I said, okay. I'm in. All right. I'll do that. So I did that. But before that, I was thinking engineering, architecture. That was where I was headed. That was kind of how I felt even God had kind of wired my thinking. And so, but I found out I really loved this journalism thing. And so took kind of a hard left. And that
was about like 16, 17, 18.
Right. So junior, senior year high school. So I decided to go into journalism. showed up at Northwestern College in St. Paul, and it was small enough that I was able to get right into journalism classes and communication classes, and I figured out I hated it. Didn't like it at all.
Not what I signed up for.
No, not at all. So I'm doing communications. And in fact, I got to do, at that point in time, it was like cable access, color commentary for the basketball team. So I'm a freshman in college. I'm doing this, and I figured out I don't like being on camera. I don't know when the camera's going to be on me. Right? I don't know what I want to say.
Yeah.
So I have this moment in my freshman year, like, Dad, I got to change majors. This communications is not for me.
Yeah.
And so try business. I try several things, and then I just figure I'm an engineer. That's what I've always been. I'm going to do that. So I transferred back to the University of Nebraska to start at the engineering college, and that fall, that teacher who had reached out to me when I was a sophomore, her name was Shirley Minton. She was killed in a car accident.
Dang.
And I went to her funeral at Papillion High School, and the gym was packed. Just packed. Current students, former students, families. And I thought to myself, I've been staring at a suspension for the last several weeks. Shirley Minton changed my life. She always told me I was going to be a teacher. And I said, I'm not going to be a teacher. No way I'm going to be a teacher.
Wow.
And Shirley Minton had always told me that. And I sat there in that gym and I thought, she made a difference in my life. Even though I'm not doing journalism, she believed in me. She saw something in me. And so I left from that place and I said, I'm going to teach.
Wow.
To which my dad said, no, you're not.
No, you're not.
and it kicked off this whole long thing. And I had to make him a deal that I'd keep a math major in addition to an education major. But I went back to Northwestern and I started to teach.
Wow.
I graduated in teaching and I became a teacher. And so,
I cut you off, and I want you to continue. When you committed and made that decision, and you went back in the leap of faith, back to Northwestern. Was there an affirmation that like this is what I need to be doing? I'm not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, was that the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I found out I loved being in a classroom. I found I loved working with kids, and so it was fun.
That's cool.
And so went into education. I was telling you earlier before we sat down about then that stint I had at the camp in Maryland. So I followed in college. I followed some friends out to a camp, residential camp. And that was the first time I had worked in an urban environment because that camp was developed for kids from urban areas in Baltimore, Annapolis, and DC who couldn't otherwise afford to go to camp. Oh, wow. And so there was a lot of scholarship. Cool. And I had the opportunity to work with students who, quite frankly, my eyes had been blinded before that. It was the first time I really realized in life that people didn't all grow up the same way I grew up.
Right.
And they didn't all grow up with the same privileges that I had grown up with. And so, so I decided to go to education. Then I do this camp and I said, you know what? I actually think the Lord is calling me to urban education.
Oh, okay.
And so then through, chose some experiences in Minneapolis and St. Paul for the rest of my education degree where I was putting myself in these urban areas.
Yeah.
Knew I wanted to come back to Nebraska. And in Nebraska, if you want to do urban education, that's OPS.
Yeah.
And so OPS is the only place I ever applied. Yeah. Came back and was there for 20 years. And so just kind of progressed through and always felt like I was still able to serve and to serve the Lord in the different positions I had, from a teacher to an administrator to a central office administrator.
Dude, I absolutely hate this, but I got to go. Because this has been like one of my favorite conversations we ever had. So
I have a couple more. Yeah, we'll touch on a couple more things. And
I'll be able to watch it at the end. But pleasure to meet you, man.
Christian,
Thank you for your time, man.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Curious. So as I always think it's interesting, there's obviously a lot of steam building up in a good way of the momentum from the TCA kind of kicking off. My nephews were part of the first classes that were enrolled in it, which was awesome. And one's still there, actually, Barrett Skoglund. And so what are your kind of visions? I mean, obviously now we have the full facility ability there, but what do you see happening in the next 3 to 5 years as you see it mature?
Right. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're just going to see our rhetorics for our high school become stronger and stronger. And so
Because right now it's small.
It is small. It is
freshman,
small.
sophomore, junior.
Freshman, sophomore, junior, and where, in our younger grades, we have 4 sections of kindergarten, 4 sections of first grade, 4 sections of second grade across the 2 cohorts.
Yes.
We have 2 sections of these older grades, and they're smaller sections. And so I think we're going to continue to see the strength in that programming. I think we're going to, when we get a graduating class, which will be next fall, we'll have our first graduating class.
How cool that.
I think we'll start to see this is the payoff, right? Everything we were doing before, now here's the payoff. Seeing our students graduate and kind of exemplify, and we've kind of talked around it, but to exemplify what we would call this portrait of the graduate, like that they're civil, we have civil, and it's that they're curious, they're influential, they're virtuous, they're intentional, and they're loving. And so I think we're going to continue to see that growth. As a school, our goal is to be somewhere around 500.
Okay.
So to continue that 2-section growth at the younger grades and to see those sections expand into the older grades. But I think that's where we are. It's wonderful to have a campus that we have now out in Waterloo. We've got some opportunity even this next year. We'll some of the space that we've leased out to a daycare up to this point, that comes back to us, which adds 6 more classrooms. And so we'll be renovating that even over the summer, which gives us more space to continue to grow those sections. But what I see for the vision of this school is that we're continuing to deepen what we're doing. We're continuing to refine what we're doing at the logic and the rhetoric stages. And then I hope for opportunities where our students are getting out into the community, where they're what's happening at TCA isn't just happening within our walls, but whether it's internships, whether it's opportunities for them to work, which is already happening. That's one of the other things that's beautiful about the collaborative model. We have students who are now managing work schedules, and they can do that because their schedule allows them to do that, because they can flex when they do their school, they can flex when they do their work. And I think that could potentially lead into some really neat intern opportunities as well in the future.
What about, is there ever, and maybe you've already touched about it, but service component of TCA?
That's great. And actually, it's so much of it's student-led. So we talked earlier about Friday. And Friday, the students on campus for Friday is 7th grade and up. So on Tuesday and Thursday, or on Monday and Wednesday, we have all of the grades just in their cohorts. But on Friday, if you're on the Tuesday, Thursday cohort, or if you're on the Monday, Wednesday cohort, you come to school, you come together with that other cohort. Friday, they have a different set of classes that they go through. It has a different feel. But one of the key pieces of that is what we call house. So in 7th grade, every student goes into a house, which is a group of people they're going to do the rest of their school with. And those houses are, they focus around 4 pillars: camaraderie, mentorship, leadership, and service. And so it is students leading service. It's leading their fellow students in how do we serve the community? What are ways that we can engage in the community around us? How do we serve our school? How do we lead the school? And so there are adults who are there, they're present, they're called sages, but it's the students who are leading. They're prefects, executive prefects who lead their peers.
Is that on a rotating basis too? Or is it like who the prefects are?
The prefects are chosen each year. Okay. So
it's a year-long post.
So they apply to be a prefect, they interview to be a prefect, and they interview to be a certain type. So they may be the prefect over mentorship, or they may be the prefect, one of the prefects over service. But they kind of choose, this is where I think some of my skills and my bent is. And so I believe in serving, and I want to help other people serve.
That's cool.
So
yeah, well, that's awesome, man. Mr. Johnson, this has been. I mean, I think this could probably go on for another hour because I'm just that curious about just in terms of. There's a whole other piece that I don't think we really get into too, and I would like to some other time. But just in terms of the educator's mind and philosophy of leadership, philosophy of instruction, philosophy of servant leadership. And how that all affects and how that's passed down, and there's a whole nother element that.
Yeah.
But, thank you so much for coming today. This is super great. Yeah. Thank you very
Well,
much for
it's a
your time.
pleasure. And
I've been working on you for a while.
you have been. You have been. Well, and part of this probably goes back to my freshman year of college where I don't know if I ever want to be on microphone.
How
right?
much
Things like
longer
that.
can I say no to him?
But that being said, I won't go too long into this, but to answer really briefly that question.
Yeah.
I think it is really, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to stewardship of the school, I think it's understanding this idea that we're all still learners.
Yeah.
That the difference between a teacher and a student, or a leader and a student, is that a teacher or a leader is a mature student, and a student is maybe an immature teacher or leader. And so just kind of thinking, how does that all, how do we grow throughout life as lifelong learners and do that? And you're right, TCA is an amazing place. TCA is a place where we've been blessed as a family. We've been there for 8 years as parents. I've got 3 kids there myself. And I'm forever indebted to the founding board, to Sarah Britsky, who's the founding board or founding head of school, who, wow, I mean, she paved the way.
Yeah.
And that also speaks to leadership, because she and I are very different leaders.
Yeah.
I could
1,000%.
not have done what she did. I could not have built from nothing what she did. That's not the giftings that the Lord gave me, but He's brought me in at this point in time to help maintain and grow. And so hugely indebted to the people who came before me to make TCA what it is.
I think that's a great point too. I think that TCA does this. It shows that there is no one way to do things. Like, oh, I could never do that. I'm not Mr. Johnson. Thing is, you may never be able to be Mr. Johnson, but you could actually do it. It would just be in your own way.
That's right.
And I think there's a beauty in that in itself of the element that's unknown, like, hey, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to put my own fingerprint on this, and we're both going to be we're going to admire and respect each other's process, because we're getting similar or better outcomes each time, but in different ways of doing it, which is, I think, the beauty of humanity in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much, Kevin, and look forward to getting to know you more down the road, and
Awesome.
as the school year goes on. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, perfect.
Appreciate it.